Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, ma'am. I have 3 points to make in response to Minister's speech. The first pertains to the point that my cut could have been interpreted to mean that some civil servants are biased. I think it's important that I make it clear that I'm not suggesting that they are, nor do I mean to undermine their work and their morale, most importantly. My motivation was to really seek a restatement of the government's commitment towards secularism. And I thank Minister for dealing with the speech and the government's approach to what I said in a very detailed way. I didn't realize Minister had made these remarks 9 times since 2015. Suffice to say, I appreciate his 10th restatement more than anything. The second point, I think it was an important remark that Minister made, which was with regard to the point on LGBT and non-LGBT persons, that they are all equal and no one is any lesser compared to the other. I completely agree with this. I support this. I think it's a very powerful statement, a fair and egalitarian approach to dealing with the matter. And I hope all Singaporeans, regardless of race or religion, actually coalesce around this and have reasoned and respectful conversations on LGBT issues, LGBTQ issues. And I think we'll be stronger as a nation for it. The third point I wish to make concerned Minister's latter comments about up to 90,000 more cameras coming on stream, provided the budget allows for it. I think it'll be foolhardy to try and stop and prevent the usefulness of technology in the support of the work of the home team to especially resolve crimes and matters of that regard. So in that sense, I can support it because it would help the police's work. What I would caution, as I have done before in other speeches, is to restate how the algorithms behind some of these cameras actually are managed and guarded. Because if that information leaks, if it goes out, I think it can damage public confidence in some of this technology that the home team seeks to introduce. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Chairman.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the first 2 points, I'm glad that Mr. Singh and we see eye to eye and he agrees with us. On the third point, I didn't say 90,000 more. I said 90,000 cameras are already in and there are going to be many more. And how many more depends on the kindness of MOF. The faster, the better. The reason is this. And I take entirely the point about making sure that the information that is obtained is used properly. For example, ICA has a lot of information. IC, registration, travel. And we need to make sure that that information is used properly and not given to unauthorized persons. Cameras, I think this issue of privacy sometimes, the way one has got to analyze is, if you, individual A, says something to an individual B in his home, that's private. It's no one's business to know what you said to your wife or to your son or to your friend at your home. But I think sometimes there is a confusion. If supposing the police are investigating a crime, they are entitled to come to your house and ask what you said, if it is relevant for the investigations. And you're duty bound to say it, and you can't say my right of privacy. And whoever you spoke with also will have to disclose, subject to arguments about privilege against self-incrimination and so on. So if you did something in a public place, the police are entitled to go and investigate you and ask you what you did if there is reason to believe a crime was committed, and they are entitled to investigate and ask everybody else what they saw and then bring that evidence to court if necessary. The camera, to some extent, either short circuits or supplements that approach. And that's the way to approach these senses. And that is why the vast majority of our public actually welcome these cameras. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Zulkarnain.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence. I have two clarifications, if I may. The first is in regards radicalized youths. I think this question would be for Second Minister Josephine Teo. Perhaps can we get some clarity as to what would be MHA's rehabilitation approach for radicalized youths? My second clarification is in respect of the rehabilitation and reintegration of ex-offenders. If I may ask MOS Faishal Ibrahim, he covered it in his speech. How has COVID-19 affected the numbers of ex-offenders and inmates securing jobs right before release or after release? Has there been a drop because of COVID-19? Thank you.
Second Minister, Mrs. Josephine Teo.
Madam Chair, I appreciate the question from Mr. Zulkarnain on how MHA approaches the rehabilitation of youths who have been self-radicalized. It is of great concern to us because if you look at the pattern, what has changed over the last decade or so is that amongst those that we have found to be radicalized, the ages of those who have been identified have gone down quite a lot. I hope it is okay for me to just take a step back and explain our approach to rehabilitation in general, and then to focus on the approach for youths. Our goal must be that these individuals are rehabilitated for the long term. In other words, we want this process to have long-term benefits. And therefore, the approach must not only be intensive, it has to be holistic. And by that, I mean that we would have to cover several key aspects: religious, psychological, and social rehabilitation. These are the three core aspects of the rehabilitative approach. And the approach will then have to be customized to the individual's own context. So that is the broad frame. On religious rehabilitation, there needs to be counseling sessions, but it has to be religious counseling with persons who are able to provide these self-radicalized youths proper religious teachings and interpretations that can effectively counter the radical ideology that they had somehow imbibed from online and other sources. And for that, we are fortunate in Singapore, we have the Religious Rehabilitative Group to draw our counselors from. Second, in terms of psychological rehabilitation, quite often amongst these self-radicalized youths, there is propensity for hatred and violence, and also a certain vulnerability to radical influence. And to deal with it, the psychologists need to help them to reframe their faulty reasoning. And this effort is actually quite an involved one. Third, we also need to pay attention to social rehabilitation, and in this regard, family support is critical. So the self-radicalized youths are granted weekly family visits, and why that is important is because they need to preserve a connection as much as possible. If they have no connection to family, you can well imagine why it will raise their risk of falling down the same path again. And here, we also assign an aftercare officer to each detainee or supervisee's family to provide social and other support, because there may be some other factors that is contributing to this person's propensity to be radicalized. So that's the general approach. Specifically for youths, we pay additional attention to the fact that at that stage of their lives, there is also the questions of identity and how one develops a sense of belonging. To whom does one identify with, and with whom does one belong? And in this regard, helping them to acquire critical thinking skills to discern radical rhetoric online, and also to cultivate a certain mental resilience to cope with life stresses. These are the areas that we pay particular attention to. For youth, another key motivation is to complete their education. And we find that if this is a practicable thing to do, helping them to continue their studies keeps them focused. And this is something that we always try to do. Among the 7 self-radicalized youths aged between 16 and 19 that were dealt with under the ISA since 2015, most have made good progress in their rehabilitation. But I will not want to downplay the challenges. Some of the youth detainees take much longer than others to come round. And this is why ISD also works with our educators to try and equip them to identify potentially self-radicalized youth early so that we can help them avoid going down this path. Thank you.
MOS, Associate Professor Faishal.
Madam Chair, the number of inmates who secured jobs in 2020 was similar to that in 2019. So about 2,500.
MOS, would you like to remove your mask?
Oh yes, sorry. Madam Chair, the number of inmates who secured jobs in 2020 was similar to that of in 2019. So about 2,520 inmates secured jobs each year after receiving the employment assistance. We were also fortunate that shortly after the introduction of COVID-19 safe management measures, YRRG went into virtual job interviews. And we were able to successfully assisted about 690 inmates to secure jobs via virtual job interviews. And when we saw more and more restrictions or the situation gets deeper into COVID-19, YRG made an intensified effort to engage potential employers. knowing that it may be challenging. But fortunately, with their hard work, we were able to not only get the existing employers to continue to work with us, 292 new employers in 2020 came on board in 2020. So we would like to sincerely thank all the supporters, employers, and those who really give the fullest support to our ex-offenders and YRSG. And we are confident that with the continuous support, we'll be able to help more and more ex-offenders and their families. Thank you, Madam.
Mr. Christopher D'Souza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was very interested in the development that MOS Professor Faishal stated about how to determine the danger of new psychoactive substances through the avenue of their outcome or their effect. Now, I think this is will be a major advantage because up to this stage, it has been decided via what is under the schedule of drugs as being illicit and the weight of the drugs. So if we're now looking at new psychoactive substances, ill effects, and then calibrating punishments according to that, I think it is a major development. So I'm actually quite interested to learning a little bit more about how this is going to translate into the punishment regime for those who traffic in new psychoactive substances and also in the regime for those who abuse new psychoactive substances. So in effect, it is a tool that I'm quite excited about because it's a new tool in the arsenal of the MDA.
MOS, Faishal.
Thank the member for the questions. Essentially, we know some of the limitations or constraints of the current approach, and we are looking at how we can empower CMB to take enforcement action against illicit activities involving MPS that are not yet listed as controlled drugs by criminalizing all such activities involving substances capable of producing a psychoactive effect unless they are exempted. Right? So essentially, the exemption clause will cover substances that are already regulated under the existing regulation or those with legitimate users. So legitimate business, commercial, and scientific interests will not be affected by the MPS legislation. And in doing so, we have also looked at other legislation, how they have done so in terms of striking a balance between legitimate business and also commercial and scientific interests, and target MPS that have been developed to exhibit properties similar to controlled drugs and are meant for abuse. So our legislation that we will be sharing and placing in the next few months will share some elements found in these foreign laws. So, and we will share more details at the second reading for the misuse of drugs bill soon.
Mr. Chris D'Souza.
I thank the MOS for that. In fact, it is a very interesting development because, if I may suggest, it need not just be restricted to new psychoactive substances. If there is going to be a shift, a policy shift to look at the effect or the outcome of a drug on an abuser, there is no reason why to restrict it only to new psychoactive substances. It could also extend, that philosophy or that policy could also extend to more traditional drugs such as heroin, opium, cocaine, ketamine, ice, etc. Because if we're looking at outcomes, then I think it makes it a little bit easier to deter the supply. Because there is, you can get purer and purer forms of traditional drugs, which then render the weight, the previous formula of deciding the danger of the drug, renders it outdated. So would you consider this new approach to even traditional drugs, is my question to the MOS?
So if you look at the current situation as in what's happening around the world, the more traditional drugs is very clear. It's easy for us to determine the outcome. The challenge has always been the NPS. So you get the list being updated and they try to use different combination of chemical structure, and you realize that it's a chasing game. So we feel that while we will study all the other developments, including the traditional drugs, but one thing that we want to really catch on is how we can address the issue of NPS effectively and better, all in the name of protecting our people, especially our young people. Nevertheless, I will take on board the suggestion that the members have made.
Ms. Nadia Samdin.
Thank you, Chairman, and I would also like to thank the MOS for hearing out my suggestions earlier. I very much appreciate the work of our Singapore Prison Service as captains of lives, and I just have two follow-ups. As some of the family situations are very complex, how can prisons better work with FSCs or enhance aftercare, or introduce more family counselling and parenting skills programs to inmates and their families? And our second point, I would very much like to ask what steps the Ministry is willing to consider to monitor and break intergenerational offending, especially and also in cases where both parents are incarcerated when there are children involved. Thank you.
So I thank the ma'am. I thank the member for the very important question, because essentially when I engage Singaporeans and also I visited the community partners, the issue of concerns has always been how are we taking care of the families, how we are making sure that the reintegration process is seamless, better, and at the same time, they are worried about intergenerational cycle, that means passing down to the next generation. So, as I mentioned earlier in my speech, this year, prison will work with MSF to share some of these data. We work with the ex-offenders to see how we can better understand and get to know more information, what's needed on the ground. And we're going to roll out to the rest of Singapore. It means essentially that we had a pilot, and we're going to roll out to the FSCs across Singapore, and to see how we can have more of such intervention to help the families. And also in relation to the training of our volunteers, our staff who are involved in such work, we want them to better understand the landscape that they are facing. So today, we are looking at how we provide more of the very broad perspective of how they can support in terms of counseling and so forth. So as we move forward, we will take on Ms. Nadia's idea of how we can also provide a training that will also touch on the different profiles of families who may be affected by such incarceration. So I thank Ms. Nadia for her suggestion and ideas. And with this, the prison and MSF are going to work together closely with the FSCs. I'm confident we are able to reach out not only to more people, but we are able to have more targeted help and assistance to those who are affected by incarceration.
Mr. Murali Pillay, would you like to withdraw your amendment?
Mr. Chairman, sir, my thanks to all the honourable MPs for speaking on the MHA COS debate, the 4 political office holders for their responses and detailing the plans and emphasis points for MHA and Home Team, and also, most importantly, my thanks to the officers of MHA and Home Team for performing their duties 24 hours a day, every day of the year, without fear or favour, in keeping Singapore safe and secure. With that, I beg leave to withdraw my amendment.
Is the honourable member given leave to withdraw the amendment? I think leave of the majority is given. The amendment is withdrawn. The question is that the sum of $6,555,769,700 for head P stand part of the main estimates. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that a sum of $1,332,058,600 for head P stand part of the development estimates. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.